Portfolio Composer, episode 167.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
Art has a real value, just like therapists don't have any problem charging for their work. Art and music especially can offer the same emotional release, and there's no reason why we should think that that shouldn't be paid for, or we should think that that doesn't have value.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Portfolio Composer. I am your host, your coach, your teacher, Garrett Hope. And again, I couldn't be more excited that you are spending the time listening to this podcast and working towards building your career as a composer or a creative, anything where you have to put work out into the world. And it's a hard endeavor, but it's a valuable endeavor. And today's interview should provide a lot of value for those of you who are working in the creative fields. And if you're a composer, you definitely fit in that mold. So I'm very excited to introduce you to Todd Brison. Welcome, Todd.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to have you here. So Todd motivates creative people. Both of his books, The Creative Curse and The Unstoppable Creative, help people get over their creative blocks and to change lives. His work has been featured on CNBC, Inc. magazine, and Apple News. So Todd, why don't we just start by you telling us a little bit of your story? How did you come to be doing this work of motivating creatives?
You know, it's funny, I think, and you'll understand this too, right? Once you have an idea of kind of the things that you're interested in and kind of the things that you're good at, sometimes the career kind of falls into place, right? Because if you had asked me even 3 years ago if that's what I would have been doing, I probably would have said no. But kind of as the need has arisen and as the new markets have developed, you kind of look and you see what you're writing. And I found out that that's where I fit best. I knew that I wrote a lot. I knew I loved to write. And I knew that, you know, based on some of my history, I was a pretty encouraging person. And so really the pieces kind of fell into place as I walked through my own creative journey. I figured out, you know what, like I've been through the process of creating for so long now that I'm ready to provide hope, right, for those who might not have it.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. Do you consider yourself a creative?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's funny, like that term gets thrown around a lot. And I think when some of us hear it, we go into this mindset of like, you've got some guy in a basement who's like got a whole lot of, hair on his face and he's painting on a canvas. But to me, it's a broader definition than that, right? Because we see creatives in the corporate world. We see creatives in healthcare. We see creatives in the finance world, because at some point, that kind of mindset is going to be needed. And so for me, it started at a newspaper, right? I brought my skills there first, and then it's evolved into some other things along the way. But the one constant for me has been my creativity and has been my ability to kind of generate ideas no matter what it is that I'm looking at.
I love how you said that. What I really like about it is it helps us not put creativity into a box, because creativity is problem solving and generating ideas. And it doesn't matter what kind of work you're doing, you can bring that kind of thinking to it. And I imagine that's part of your mission through the work you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's so many people for so long, right? The creative has had a little bit of a stigma. So now it's about empowering the creative within everyone, right? No matter what you're in, whether you want to write books or compose like so much of your audience or not. It's just about accessing the same tools, the same ideas and the mindset to use wherever it is that you are.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it reminds me of a Daniel Pink book that I read many years ago. I think it's almost 10 years old now, but it's, I don't know if you've read it, but it's called A Whole New Mind, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future.
Oh, nice. I have not read it, actually.
And I think his argument is that the right brain being the creative side, right? And it's not so clear-cut, but the message is apply creativity to all areas of your life. And what we need in the future are people who can be creative in their problem solving. And as I read through your website and I read many of your blog posts, that's the message I was getting from you, that creativity is necessary for survival in the future. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about left brain, right brain stuff, and Daniel Pink, I think, hits it right on the head. You know, I know of him, but I haven't read that one, and that concept makes so much sense to me. Because the thing is, like, we're seeing it all in the world. It's just a matter of how much we want to accept, right? Contractors are on the rise. Freelancers are on the rise. Part-time employees on the rise. And what we're seeing is that because of robots and technology has kind of caught up to where we are, so many of those tasks that we used to do and we used to have humans do have been taken over by a machine who can do things flawlessly, who can do things while the rest of us sleep, and it can do things nonstop, you know, with minimal maintenance. And so what that means to me is that creativity and ideas are going to be valued a lot more than time and effort in the future. I think that's the inevitable kind of road that we're all headed down now. And so it's kind of urgent that all of us are able to access that critical thinking side, access that problem solving side, because if you want to show up and perform a task at a job for a paycheck, frankly, those days are kind of going away.
Because we can be automated now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Or it can be done better, or it can be done not at all. I mean, especially if you're an American, right? The amount of money you need to charge to survive, basically, if you're a freelancer, it gets tough because the cost of living here is so much higher than it is in other parts of the world. And so, you know, if I'm a small business or even if I'm a big business trying to cut costs, and I'm looking at a creative web designer in America who has to charge $200 to kind of keep his business going, as opposed to someone overseas, if the cost is the only variable, it gets very, very tough to then justify you charging that much. And that's where the extra idea juice and the creativity comes into play.
Oh, I like that. I often speak about that extra bit as being the value we really add, not just performing a task. But what, Todd, in your opinion, because I'm deeply invested in this as a creative person, as someone who builds a portfolio lifestyle of income generating activities. What does the future of work look like then for those of us who create for not just enjoyment and satisfaction, but also to make a living?
Sure. I think it's a combination of a few things. I think first and foremost, we all have to create a space in order to do our best work. And this isn't just a physical space, right? I'm starting here because this is kind of the groundwork for everything else. You have to have the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, the intellectual space to do creative work, because the fact of the matter is we produce so much stuff as a human race on a daily basis. If you tried to keep up with every piece of news that came out every day, you would drive yourself insane. And so the first step, I think, to surviving in the new world, to building a living in the new world, is having that routine for yourself to kind of create an outlet for you to work, really, to put in the building blocks to consistently get through things on a daily basis and do what is important to you, not just what is the loudest at the time, right? So that's the first step, is creating kind of this environment for yourself. The second step, honestly, is something you hit on right before I could even say it, which is finding and solving problems. Like every big corporation now is essentially having to figure out how to catch up with all these startups. I have a friend who's in the sales space, and he's working in healthcare, and his product is revolutionary, and the team is so small. And I should have looked him up beforehand so I could tell you exactly what he does, but it's got something to do with the digitization, the automation of all these healthcare files so that you're not filling out 87 sheets of paper, and they're able to make a legitimate impact in the market that was once dominated only by huge corporations. So if you're the person who can step into that corporation, or better yet, if you're listening to this right now and you already have a full-time job and you suddenly decide, oh, you know what? Like, I need to become a problem solver for this company, or else all of us are going to be outstripped by someone younger, a company that's leaner, a company that's faster, and could do things without all the corporate stuff. And so solving those problems for companies is an insanely valuable thing. And I would say even, or especially if you can do it like kind of as a freelancer and do it for more than one company at once. And then the third element, because I believe that frankly, it's difficult to make a prosperous living on one job alone or one piece of work alone, and sell your art, right? And we talked about this before, like art is so much more than what we're kind of boxing it in as. Art is telling your story through any means necessary, through whatever means you have, writing, painting, composing, doing whatever it is to add that extra bit of lifestyle or extra bit of income in there, right? And I think truly, in order to fully experience life and fully get everything that this planet has to offer, we all need to go through the process of creating something that we came up in our mind and then turning around and saying, I made this. It is valuable. I am not going to give it to you unless you give me X amount of dollars. And sometimes that's what it takes in order to fully build this life in the new world.
Okay, so I like that. I want to recap here so make sure I understand. You said we need to create an environment for ourselves.
Yes.
Which I understood to mean kind of creating your own space in which to create, not just a physical space, but a mental space too.
Yep.
Okay. And then finding and solving problems. So essentially, do we need to become consultants?
You know what? I think so. Like, if that's the label that hits home, I think that makes a whole lot of sense, because one of the best things you could do, and this is one of the best things, I had a boss and a mentor who kind of taught me this, but one of the best things you can do at a job is essentially become the company. Like, there's no there's no like, oh, I'm getting here and I'm collecting a paycheck. If you work for XYZ Incorporated, you are XYZ Incorporated, and the financial success of the business is going to be, or needs to be, tied to your financial success. So if it's a consultant that flips that switch, that's exactly how I would think of it. You're solving problems for the business, no matter what your title is, or no matter what your level is.
And then lastly, you said sell your art. And this is hard.
Yes.
And I bet people who are listening, big red flags, and the resistance urge raised its ugly head and is now saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. But this is what we're doing. And this is part of what I'm trying to help composers with in the Portfolio Composer. So let's dig into this, Todd.
Okay, let's do it.
How do we sell our art, for one? And then a follow-up question is, how do we sell our art without degrading our artistic integrity?
Absolutely. So what I want to first talk about is kind of the emotional impact of this. Because like you said, when you say it's hard, what you mean is that it is mentally and emotionally, for most of us, difficult to get to that place.
Yes.
Why? Because like, we weren't born to sell. We were born to create stuff. Most of us in this community who identify as creatives were born to make stuff. Like, that's all we want to do. We want to make new things and show it to the world for the sheer joy of making new things. But when it comes to, you become an adult and you realize, oops, I got some bills to pay here. What we realize is that there are certain goals, there's certain monetary needs that we have to meet. And so how do you do it without diminishing the quality of your work? I think, to me, one of my favorite people in the world is Benjamin Zander, who was I think he was a conductor for the Boston Philharmonic for a while. And he has an amazing TED Talk. And to me, this really iterates how we need to think to get our minds around selling our art. He was in the 90s. He traveled around the world kind of playing music to different communities and getting them involved in classical music, because at the time, even then, classical music was struggling, right? And it was having trouble finding its legs as there were all these new trends coming out and different ways to make music. And so he's doing what he does, which is playing classical music. And he takes this one trip to Ireland in the middle of the Troubles, which is where the whole country is basically torn apart by war and violence. And there's just a lot of bad stuff going on. And Benjamin Zander goes in and plays I think it's a Chopin prelude in E minor to a bunch of kids. And he plays the piece, right? And everybody claps and they just nod and everything goes fine and nothing seems really out of the ordinary until afterwards, he's standing there packing up or whatever. And this young child walks up to him and he says, "Last year, my brother was shot in the street and I had to watch it happen. And I was never able to cry or mourn for my brother because we had to move on with life. But the minute you played that piece, I was sitting in the back with tears streaming down my face, and I was finally able to cry. And it felt so good to cry for my brother." And to me, that is just value. It's like, that's the story to me that reminds me that art has a real value. Just like therapists don't have any problem charging for their work. Art and music especially can offer the same emotional release, and there's no reason why we should think that shouldn't be paid for, or we should think that doesn't have value.
So I agree that it has value and it can be transformative. How do we get over those hurdles or the limiting mindset?
I think it comes back to, for the most part, doing a lot of work. At least that's what it's been for me. It's gotten to a point, I think, where you start out and you don't feel like your stuff is very good. And I think one of the things, well, let's do it this way: quantity and quality, right? If you do a lot of work, there's value in that. And there's sort of this process where you as the creative overcomes these hurdles because you figure out how to make more music. You figure out how to arrange notes in ways that you have never done before. You figure out when something needs to be 3/4 or 4/4 or whatever it needs to be. And then you get a little more in tune with your craft every time you step up to the piano or guitar or whatever it is. And then you naturally kind of improve that quality. So to me, those are the two things: improving quantity so that more people have a chance of finding you, or that one of your piece will, resonate with someone while another one might not. And then quality, which it means different things to different audiences and different people. But essentially that means doing your best work or getting your work to the level that the experts are at. And, I say that with a little bit of knowledge of the creative mindset, right? Because at some point or on some level, we have trouble believing that we're an expert at anything. But if you look at your work objectively, next to the people that you want to emulate, that's your marker. And then you can say, okay, I believe that this work is quality. And that's the biggest hurdle in my mind. If you can say, I know that this work is the best that I have done, and I know at least one other person on this planet will get value out of this, to me, that's a signal that you're starting to overcome those hurdles and get to a point where you can then sell that work.
Are those reasons why you think a lot of people never really make money creating art?
I think so. I think so. I think that's part of the struggle is we never really feel like we're there. And these two things kind of line up with a couple of things that I talk about often. And the first one your audience might be familiar with. It's something Ira Glass calls the gap. Have you talked about that on the show before?
Probably, but maybe not with that terminology. So go ahead and define it for us.
Right, the gap. So Ira Glass, his amazing statement, he went on the radio and talked about nobody tells young people, I wish somebody had told me when I started out. But the difference between average people and excellent people in the creative world is the gap. And what happens is when you start out, right, you start out and you want your creative work to have this special thing. And you want to feel something from it. But the problem is your first work is just like not that good. And as Ira Glass says, what happens then is your taste kicks in. You get involved in creative work because you have excellent taste. But the problem is your taste backfires because it can tell that what you're creating is not as good as it could be. And so it's just a fight every day to kind of build up the skills to catch up to your taste, which is excellent, which is incredible, which is well refined because you've been admiring creative people for so long. And that phenomenon right there is what Ira Glass calls the gap. And it's one big reason people are never able to cross that bridge and sell art. I think the other thing is, I don't know, maybe not exactly the polar opposite of that, but there's something else called the curse of knowledge, right? So if I were to ask you, Garrett, how to ride a bike right now, like to explain it to me from scratch, how would you do that?
You really want me to answer that?
Yeah, definitely. Give me a few steps and I'll cut you off.
Well, having taught a child in the past, I think one of the first things you have to do is you have to teach a child to have balance, and then the courage to trust, have faith in the balance and as the bike moves forward. But I mean, I could illuminate a whole bunch of micro steps in between all of these. But right. You're asking someone who is also a teacher at heart. So like I think I know where you're going, but for me, it's breaking down processes into steps is not an issue, but I think it is for a lot of other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have recently taught a child to ride a bike, so you're even more familiar with the process. But even as you're saying that, it's like, okay, but like if I'm a kid and I'm hearing, balance on the bike and have faith it'll take you where it needs to go, that's crazy to me. But if right. I were to, I don't know where to put my legs, I don't know where to put my arms, I don't know which way to steer to make the thing go where it needs to go. But if I were to sit and watch you ride a bike, you could do it flawlessly, and there would be no need to explain every step. And the same thing happens with our art is once we do get better, man, the human brain is so efficient that it learns things and just like tucks them in there. So we don't even consciously, even though you or I would have, a very hard time kind of sitting down and saying, okay, first you want to pull one leg over the seat of the bike and then you put your left leg. That would take a long time. But because there's so much knowledge in there, we are able to do it unconsciously. What does that have to do with people selling art? Well, in our own minds, it kind of devalues what we know because we know it so well. And this is the curse of knowledge. We forget that we know so many things that other people simply don't.
I see that so much, especially with those who have studied for years and years. A lot of, there's a couple different traditional paths composers take after they accomplish their undergrad. And one of those is to go on to graduate school, master's and then doctorate and then to teach. And the curse of knowledge runs rampant the more education we have attained.
Right.
And along with that becomes a whole bunch of virtue signaling about, oh, well, I have my doctorate and I know this. Therefore, there's also a correlation with that attitude with how dare I sell my art? I'm making, statements or whatever. Right, exactly.
But it's, to me, like, I hear that and I understand that and I feel that, but my mindset right now is that if you do that and you keep that from the world and you do things only to make a statement to you or whatever, I think that's almost a little selfish. Whereas on the other hand, like, if you're Ben Zander and you're taking Chopin's, prelude to the streets, you know that that's not only going to make a statement, it is valuable for those people. And I think that's the shift, is that we're not doing art just for us. If you can move to that point where you're not doing art just for you, but for the people who need it, then it's going to be much easier to then turn around and sell that art, I think.
You're releasing a book, and this
yes.
This interview is going to come out on the same day your book is released. Tell us about the book and then how we can go and get it.
Amazing. Well, the book is called The Unstoppable Creative. And I came up for kind of the concept of this book after my first one comes out. And as happens so often, you do the first thing, and while you're in the middle of doing the first thing, the idea for the second thing comes. I think that's like a creative thing. I don't know what it is, but as soon as you're about ready to like launch this huge thing, you're like, okay, well, like that, let's just do something else. You know what I mean? Like You get a new idea. And so for me, my first book was called The Creative's Curse. And while that was kind of like we were just talking about, a statement talking about how, it's not all it's cracked up to be an artist. It's tough to be creative. That someone kind of messaged me and they were like, hey, loved the book. This is an amazing point. I feel that you understand the mindset very well, but like, what's next? Basically. And I kind of sat there and I thought, okay, that's a good question, right? Because so many of us, while you would read the first book and you would go, man, like this guy understands what's happening in the creative mind, and you would get some insight from that, and why we think the way we do and why it's harder than it should be, there wouldn't necessarily be any steps to follow through. So the Unstoppable Creative is kind of the follow-up to that. And the 3 points in the book are what we talked about earlier. It's about how to survive in the new world. So creating that environment, finding out how to solve problems for specific companies and get involved at a higher level than you are, and then selling your art, not just like the theory or the overcoming the barriers, but some specific steps. All of that is going to be in the book. And when you're listening to this, you can turn it off right now and go to unstoppable.toddbrison.com and pick it up. And yeah, I hope everyone does that, because it's definitely a good read.
Yeah, I'll put links to that in the show notes. So those of you who are listening, if you're driving the car, you can do this when you're not driving, but you'll be able to click on the link in the show notes. And for most pod catching apps on smartphones, if you click on the cover art, you can then see the show notes. Sometimes it operates differently for each app and platform, but that generally works. Todd, we can go to unstoppable.toddbrison.com, you said.
That is correct, and you can pick it up. There are a couple different tiers, and it's all pay what you want, because I wanted to make sure that everyone could to basically pay what they want and give what they think it's worth.
Excellent. And can we get hard copy versions too?
It's digital only, but I'll have the audiobook available, and then every kind of digital format you can think of. And probably once this launch goes down, we will revamp and get the paper book out as well.
Very, very cool. I've appreciated this conversation with you so much, Todd. I think you and I are of a similar mindset, and I love how you're framing the conversation and you're providing inspiration and resources for those of us who are out there creating art to go the next step. So thank you. But before we take a break and go to the lightning round, is there anything else you wanted to talk about today that I failed to ask you?
I just think it's important for everyone to know that you matter. If you're listening to this right now, I don't know your background, but I know if you're in the creative mindset, you've struggled with this. Am I good enough? Can I say what I'm trying to say? Can I be who I want to be? Will I ever become what I hope to become? And I just want to remind you that you are worth it right now. You're there right now. You're in the middle of the process right now, becoming exactly who you are supposed to be. And so my only request and the thing that I beg of you is to keep going, because the world is never going to be at a place where we don't need more art.
Amen. Love it. All right, let's take a quick break and we'll come back for the lightning round.
Awesome.
I am in the process of booking speaking gigs and seminars and workshops for the spring. If you are an educator and would like me to Skype in or visit your classroom or school to talk about the business of music, setting yourself up for success after graduation, what it means to think like a small business owner, branding, marketing, or mindset, send me an email. You can do that most easily through the portfoliocomposer.com website. There's a contact page which allows you to fill out a form and send me a quick email. I'd love to discuss this with you further before all my time gets completely eaten up. I look forward to hearing from you guys. Thanks.
Welcome to the lightning round.
All right, Todd, knowing what you know now and balancing your life experience, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Don't stop. Keep going.
Yeah, I'm going to dig into that. In what ways did you stop? What did that mean?
I think some of the times I doubted the path I was on, and I doubted my writing was like the thing. If I could go back and tell myself anything, it would be continue to dive into that talent instead of looking elsewhere for validation.
What is a personal habit of yours that you feel leads to your success?
Oh, this is an interesting one. One of the weird things I do is I have a moleskin notebook, and every morning I get up and I write just the date on the line. So if you were to look at my notebook, you might think I was a little crazy, because it just says November 1st, 2017, November 2nd, 2017, November. And to me, that's just my acknowledgement of the day.
Okay, here we are. I'm doing this. Yep.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you play an instrument?
I do, actually. I play a little bit of piano, chords only.
That's okay. Hey, I'm just happy you're making music.
Absolutely.
But what is an instrument that you've always wanted to learn to play, and why?
Oh my gosh. Well, okay, it's a little different between what I want to play and what my favorite instrument is. My favorite instrument, without question, is the violin, because I can't even explain it. It's just unbelievable. The strings speak to me in ways that nothing else does. Probably if I could pick anything I would want to play, I think guitar would be, like, I'm sitting here like, that would be most practical. But guitar, I really do wish I could play guitar.
I'm looking for one or two of those pieces that were defining moments for you. Pieces that made time stop, that might have altered your perspective. And this doesn't have to be classical music. It can be anything.
Okay, well, I'll give you one classical for the audience, and then I'll give you one like closer to pop culture.
Anything you want.
I sung in high school, and when you sing choir in high school in a small town in Tennessee, you kind of stick to English stuff and the hits so that people will come and see the show, right? Like you don't do anything too daring or drastic, and there's a lot of kind of choral arrangements of pop. And one day when I'm in class, the director hands out this piece, and on the top it says, Mozart Requiem, Lacrimosa. And I'm like, what is this? I don't understand the words. And then she played it for us. And I'm getting goosebumps right now, because that was the same reaction I had back then. Like, I had no idea that music, especially classical music, because, I was a teenager. I had no idea that music could do that. And it just literally changed my whole perspective. And then the second one is probably Feel My Love. There's an Adele cover that played at my wife and I's wedding. And every time I think about it, it takes me back.
That's great. I love it. I am working hard to expand what I listen to and my understanding of all spectrums of music creation. So I've recently added this question to my list here, but can you name a piece by a minority or female composer that you feel we should all listen to and know? And again, this can be any style of music.
I'm trying to think. Actually, I don't know if this is a pop answer or not, but Lindsey Sterling is a violinist who has been able to, she's huge on YouTube now, but I think she was someone who was able to take her talent, which was kind of a classical boxed in talent, and really show us what could be done with a violin and what could be done with, when you go straight to an audience and say, this is what I have, and make yourself more than just a violinist.
Yeah. So I love reading, and I think books are one of the most underutilized resources we have available to us. So I'm very excited to read your new book and get that in the hands of composers. But can you name a book that could benefit the personal, creative, or business lives of the Portfolio Composer listeners?
Absolutely. The book that I'm actually reading right now is called The Power of When. And it is not necessarily like a creative book, but what it is kind of a manual to when you do stuff best during the day. So just to give, the author, Michael Bruce, calls it a chronotype. And it's there are 4 options, basically when you should rise and when you should work and when you should sleep. And what's interesting is, for creative people, like, a lot of us fall in that category of staying up really late. Like, we get a little bit of burst of energy when the world is asleep. So The Power of When is a great book to kind of get familiar with how you can work best.
Where can people find you on the internet, and how can they get a hold of you?
Basically, I'm at Todd Brison on everything. If you want to email me, todd@toddbrison.com. If you want to text me, 615-428-3309. I had to think to get my own number. I try to be open to as much as possible. And so if you Google Todd Brison, you'll find me.
Go to Todd Brison's website and check out the book. It's pay what you want, right?
That is correct.
You read through Todd's blog, you're going to find a tremendous amount of value, and you can then take that value and show that to Todd by paying what you think that book is worth. Todd, thank you so much for your time. This has been tremendous. I value the work you're doing, and I'm really glad you're putting it out in the world.
Well, thank you so much, Garrett. And it's been awesome to talk with you today. So thank you for making the time.